Moses is remembered as the man who stood against the overwhelming power of Egypt, who dared to challenge Pharaoh, faced the gods of a foreign empire, and parted the Red Sea so that a great multitude could walk through it into freedom. He is known as the one who climbed the mountain surrounded by fire and thick clouds, and received from God's own hand the commandments that would form and guide a nation. For many people, Moses seems almost legendary, a lasting symbol of faith, obedience, and spiritual authority. Yet the story of Moses is not only about spectacular miracles or the dramatic events witnessed by crowds. There is another side, less talked about and nearly forgotten, that took place far from Mount Sinai, far from the royal palace, and far from the cries of the people. It is a quiet and deeply human side of his life, his sons. Not many realize that Moses had two sons, Gersham and Eleazar. While the descendants of Aaron became the heart of the priesthood, serving at the altar and safeguarding the presence of God among Israel, the sons of Moses slowly fade from the biblical account. They do not take leadership roles. They do not receive high positions. They are not placed at the center of the story. This silence leads to an unsettling question. Why? Did they decide to walk a different road? Were they pushed aside by human choices? Or was there a greater purpose hidden behind this quiet absence? Scripture does not give a clear answer, but the few details that remain seem to speak more powerfully than we might expect. In the gaps between the lines, in verses that are rarely mentioned, an unexpected truth begins to appear. This account deeply resonates with anyone who has ever felt overlooked, forgotten, or left in the background. Often, the work of God is not displayed under bright lights, but carried out quietly behind the scenes. The story of these two sons begins far away from the Exodus, far from the plagues, and far from public glory. It starts during a season of exile, a time when Moses lived in obscurity and silence. After giving up the comfort of Egypt's palace and losing the life he once knew, Moses escaped to Midian. He was a man shaped by his past, burdened by the memory of defending a Hebrew slave at the cost of an Egyptian's life. He was no longer a prince, and not yet a deliverer. He was a fugitive and a stranger in a foreign land. In this dry and distant place, far from any visible promise, God began forming the character of the man who would eventually lead Israel. In Midian, Moses met Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro, a respected priest known for his spiritual understanding. Their marriage was more than a simple family arrangement. It marked a new chapter in Moses' life. He moved from the grandeur of Egypt to the humble life of the desert, from the loud atmosphere of political power to the quiet routine of tending sheep. It was in this simple setting that his sons were born, and their names carried deep meaning. The first son was named Gersham, a name connected to the idea of being a stranger or outsider. Moses said, "I have been a foreigner in a foreign land." The name was not just symbolic, it reflected how Moses saw himself at that time. Gersham became a living reminder of separation, of losing his homeland, and of the painful feeling of not truly belonging anywhere. Each time Moses spoke his son's name, he was reminded of what he had left behind. But the narrative does not remain focused on sorrow. The second son was named Eleazar, which means, "God is my help." Moses explained, "The God of my fathers rescued me from Pharaoh's sword." Unlike the first name, this one expressed confidence and hope. It was a declaration of faith and a testimony that, even during exile, God was still near, protecting, guiding, and remaining faithful. Two sons, two different names, two spiritual statements. Together, they form a deeply personal picture of Moses' life, far from public attention. Gershom stood as a symbol of exile and displacement. Eleazar declared trust in God's help. Side by side, their names tell the story of a family living at the edge of major historical events, while God's greater purpose continued to unfold quietly. Moses was not only a prophet, a giver of the law, and the leader of a nation. He was also a husband and a father. His sons, born far from the central action of the biblical story, became quiet observers of a mission that would transform the future of an entire people. The first time the Bible refers to the sons of Moses is so subtle that it is easy to overlook, shortly after his marriage to Zipporah. In Exodus 2:22, the text simply states, "She gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom." There is no dramatic description, no recorded speech, no celebration. It is mentioned briefly, almost hidden among much larger events. The birth is described in only a few words, as though it stands on the edge of the great story that is just beginning to develop. Time then moves on. Years pass, perhaps even decades. During this long period, the biblical account remains completely silent about these boys. While God's plan advances with powerful plagues, bold confrontations with Pharaoh, miraculous signs, and the desperate cries of an oppressed nation, Gersham and Eleazar are not mentioned at all. They grow up away from public view. They live far from the main stage where God reveals his power before the world. It is only in Exodus 18 that they appear again, when Jethro brings Zipporah and the children to meet Moses in the wilderness after Israel has already been delivered. This reunion happens late and almost quietly, after the most dramatic events have already taken place. From the moment Gersham is born until this meeting in the desert, Scripture says nothing about them. There is no description of their childhood, no record of how they reacted to miracles, no sign that they took part in the defining events of Israel's history. Throughout the entire Exodus story, from the plagues that struck Egypt to the parting of the sea, from the manna that fell daily from heaven to the thunder that sounded at Sinai, the sons of Moses remain unseen in the written account. It is as if they always walked just behind the story itself, present in reality but absent from the official memory. However, there is one intense and mysterious moment when the family suddenly returns to the center of the narrative. In Exodus 4:20, Moses leaves Midian and begins the journey back to Egypt in obedience to God's command, bringing Zipporah and his sons with him. During the journey, something unexpected occurs. God confronts Moses and threatens his life because one of his sons had not been circumcised, which was an essential sign of the covenant. The scene is short, but filled with spiritual seriousness and tension. Without hesitation, Zipporah steps in. She carries out the covenant ritual herself and speaks strong words in a moment marked by blood, urgency, and the weight of obedience. It was a powerful moment when obedience stepped in and stopped judgment. In that instant, Moses' entire mission was nearly endangered by something taking place inside his own family. It is striking that this episode is one of the very few times when one of his sons appears clearly in the story. Shortly afterward, the attention moves away again. The narrative shifts back to the struggle between Moses and Pharaoh. Once more, silence surrounds the sons. While other individuals rise to importance, gain authority, and speak openly, the sons of Moses remain in the background. We never see them standing beside their father before the people. We never hear them deliver prophecies, guide the nation, or step forward to claim influence. They appear to be quiet witnesses of a divine work that reshaped an entire nation. This naturally raises an unavoidable question. Why were Moses' sons not emphasized in the same way he was? If Moses was chosen to speak on behalf of God, why were Gersham and Eleazar not given a similar role? The explanation is not found in one single verse, but in pieces spread throughout Scripture. A key clue appears when we notice the special role given to Aaron's family. In Exodus 28, the Lord instructs that Aaron and his sons be set apart and consecrated as priests. Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar are appointed for service at the altar. This decision was not based on their closeness to Moses as relatives, but on God's sovereign choice. From Aaron's line, the entire priesthood of Israel would be formed. Sacred duties, spiritual authority, and holy responsibilities would be handed down from one generation to another through that family. This divine appointment clearly showed that God had a different intention for the sons of Moses. Even though Moses was the deliverer, the mediator of the covenant, and the one who spoke with God in a unique and intimate way, his sons did not automatically receive his position. This was not accidental, it was deliberate. God ensured that spiritual authority would not simply become a family inheritance. In doing so, he demonstrated that a true calling is not passed through bloodlines, but given according to his own purpose. There is also a deeper explanation connected to the uniqueness of Moses himself. His mission was without equal and without repetition. Deuteronomy 34:10 declares that no prophet has arisen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. His calling was singular, unmatched, and impossible to duplicate. It could not simply be transferred to someone else. From this, we learn an important principle. God's plan for one individual is not automatically extended to his children. What he accomplishes in one generation does not have to be repeated in the next. His ways do not follow human systems or align with the expectations of family succession. The work of the Spirit does not depend on tradition, last names, or social assumptions. Moses was chosen to create a path where none existed before. But Gersham and Eleazar were not appointed to continue that exact task. This was not because they lacked worth, ability, or faithfulness. Rather, it was because God had prepared a different assignment for them. There is yet another reason, often unnoticed, that helps explain why Moses' sons were absent during the most dramatic events of the Exodus. In Exodus 18, we are told that Jethro brought Zipporah and the children back to meet Moses in the wilderness. This detail suggests something significant. At some earlier point, the family had returned to Midian. That means Gersham and Eleazar were not present during the critical events in Egypt. They did not personally see the plagues fall upon the land. They did not walk through the parted sea. They did not hear the cries of the enslaved people or witness the fear of the Egyptians overwhelmed by God's power. They were not there during the first stages of the journey through the desert, when Israel's faith was shaped through both miracles and hardships. Because of this absence, perhaps they were not recognized either by the people or within Israel's spiritual framework as individuals prepared to lead or to hold prominent roles among the Levites. In that historical setting, spiritual leadership was strongly tied to first-hand participation in the foundational events that established the nation. Even so, the Bible's silence about them should never be mistaken for abandonment or lack of importance. In fact, the quiet and almost hidden role of Gersham and Eleazar teaches one of the most profound lessons found in Scripture. Not every calling from God takes place in public view. Some people are chosen to guide crowds and stand before nations. Others are chosen to quietly support and preserve the work behind the scenes. The absence of their names during the most dramatic events does not reduce the worth of their lives. Instead, that silence gently reminds us that in God's eyes, every responsibility has meaning. Every individual has value. Each generation holds a unique role within a much larger divine purpose. The fact that Moses' sons are missing from the most famous chapters of Israel's story does not signal rejection. Rather, it reflects balance within God's design. In this design, visible and invisible roles complement one another. Some are appointed to lead. Others are called to uphold and sustain. Some are given voices to declare truth openly. Others are given willing hands to serve faithfully. Yet all, in their own distinct ways, honor the one who called them. Although many chapters pass without mentioning Gersham and Eleazar, this does not mean their story ended in silence. Centuries later, in less frequently read portions of Scripture such as 1 Chronicles, their names appear once more. The family line of Moses did not vanish. It simply followed a different direction. They did not become national leaders, prophets, or rulers. Instead, they became Levites, servants devoted to sacred responsibilities, men committed to maintaining worship in Israel. In 1 Chronicles 23, the text clearly states that the sons of Moses, described as the servant of God, were included among the tribe of Levi. One of Gersham's descendants, Shebuel, is identified as a leader entrusted with responsibilities connected to temple service. Eleazar had a son named Rehabiah, and Scripture notes that his descendants became very numerous. This growth represents more than increasing numbers. It points to continuity, to God's steady care, and to quiet blessing sustained over time, though they did not stand in the spotlight like priests from Aaron's line or patriarchs of the nation. Their descendants played an important part in worship and in safeguarding what was sacred. The Levites carried a vital responsibility. They protected holy objects, assisted in sacrifices, assembled and transported the tabernacle, and ensured that the temple functioned properly. Without their service, public worship could not have continued. They formed the unseen support of Israel's spiritual life. the name Shebuel appears again in 1 Chronicles 24, not as someone overlooked, but as a Levitical leader responsible for organizing the divisions of temple service. He is listed among family heads who carried authority and structure within the sacred system. The story that unfolds through the descendants of Gersham reveals something essential about Israel's spirituality, something easily missed when reading too quickly. Although Gersham and his family did not receive the exclusive priestly office given to Aaron's descendants, this did not mean they were excluded from spiritual service or considered less valuable before God. On the contrary, they remained firmly rooted within the Levitical tradition. They were fully engaged in sacred duties, faithfully supporting the unseen framework that kept worship alive in the Lord's sanctuary. These men did not occupy the most visible positions. They did not wear the garments that symbolized high priestly authority, nor did they proclaim formal blessings before the assembly. Yet, every day, they handled holy responsibilities. They performed necessary, repetitive, and often unnoticed tasks. Duties that guaranteed worship continued, order was maintained, and reverence was preserved. Many people benefited from the results of their work, but few recognized the spiritual significance behind it. A similar pattern can be seen in the family line of Rehabiah, the son of Eleazar. Their names are not connected to famous wars, territorial victories, or heroic stories celebrated by the nation. There are no written accounts of powerful speeches, visible miracles, or positions of outstanding leadership attached to them. Even so, their role was closely intertwined with the spiritual life of Israel. Day after day, they helped preserve the sacred rhythm of worship. They maintained order, protected reverence, and upheld the constant awareness that God lived among his people. When Scripture mentions that the sons of Rehabiah were numerous, it is doing more than listing a family record. It is pointing to continuity. It highlights a legacy that extended across generations without losing its identity. It speaks of steady, faithful, and quiet service. A devotion that does not rely on public praise in order to remain strong. This kind of loyalty may not draw attention from human observers, but it is always seen by the Lord. The God who examines the heart and sees what remains hidden honors those who serve faithfully without seeking recognition. The account of Gersham and Eleazar stands for all who dedicate themselves to God not to gain applause, but simply out of obedience. These were men whose security rested not in visibility, but in perseverance. They were not publicly exalted, yet they were remembered before God. More than that, they became instruments in his hands to keep the fire of worship burning within Israel, even during moments when no one seemed to notice. Serving without being recognized is not the same as being forgotten. In reality, it means being known by the one who truly sees. It means occupying a position that may appear invisible to people, yet carries lasting worth in God's kingdom. The path taken by the sons of Moses, defined not by dramatic public accomplishments but by silence and faithfulness, reveals important truths about how God carries out his purposes. This naturally leads to a question. Why did the sons of the man who spoke with God face to face not rise to prominent roles? Why were they not elevated like Joshua and Caleb, or like Aaron's sons, Nadab and Eleazar? The answer is rooted in a basic spiritual principle. God's calling is not something that can be inherited. Moses was personally selected for a specific and extraordinary mission: to free Israel, guide them through the wilderness, and receive the divine law. That calling was unique and could not simply be passed on. A mission given by God does not move automatically from parent to child. It is assigned according to the Lord's sovereign will, in the time and manner he chooses. This truth challenges the idea that spiritual favor automatically remains within a family line. God does not select individuals based on ancestry, closeness to authority, or social standing. He chooses according to his eternal plan. Every person receives his or her calling individually. The position of a father, no matter how honored, does not decide the spiritual future of a child. God works through wisdom rather than tradition, through intention rather than habit. There is also a deeper lesson in this story. Being close to spiritual leaders is not the same as being close to God himself. Gersham and Eleazar grew up near Moses. They lived beside the man who spoke with God as one speaks to a friend. They saw the glory descend upon the tent of meeting. They heard about holy mountains and divine encounters. They even witnessed their father's face shine after being in God's presence. Yet standing near power is not the same as stepping into it. Living next to someone who has been chosen does not guarantee that you will receive the same assignment. Faith cannot be inherited like property. Holiness cannot be transferred simply through association. A person can walk beside someone who is filled with the Spirit and still remain unchanged inside. Spiritual influence is not absorbed automatically. Each individual must personally pursue a relationship with God. Every heart must decide how it will respond to the divine call. Gersham and Eleazar lived near the man who experienced one of the closest relationships with God recorded in Scripture. Even so, their journey unfolded differently. This brings us to a serious and unavoidable reality. No one survives spiritually on the faith of their parents, nor is anyone transformed simply because their leaders are spiritual. Obedience is a personal path. Every person must choose to walk it for themselves. From the quietness surrounding this story, one final lesson becomes clear: the beauty of serving without the desire for recognition. Although the sons of Moses are not counted among the most celebrated heroes of faith, they served faithfully. Their descendants remained devoted within the tribe of Levi for many generations. They did not chase position. They did not fight for prestige. They did not attempt to elevate themselves. They simply carried out their responsibilities. And through that steady service, they reflected the very heart of God. The Lord places greater value on faithfulness than on fame. We live in a time when visibility is often mistaken for significance. In today's culture, being noticed is frequently equated with being important, and silence is sometimes viewed as weakness or failure. Scripture, however, presents a completely different perspective. It teaches that the person who quietly cares for the sanctuary out of love may be just as honored as the prophet who addresses great crowds. God does not measure greatness by the number of observers, but by the intention of the heart. He sees beyond outward appearance, examines inner motives, and rewards sincere devotion. The account of Gersham and Eleazar speaks directly about this quiet form of redemption and enduring legacy. Even though they were not present in the most dramatic scenes of Israel's history, their names were not removed from the record. Instead, they were preserved. Their families expanded, their descendants increased. Their line continued firmly. Generation after generation, they remained loyal to the God of their forefathers, protecting what was holy even while living far from public attention. Day after day, without applause or recognition, they supported the spiritual framework that upheld the nation. This reveals something deeply powerful. Even when everything appears silent, God is shaping something lasting. His purposes do not always begin with dramatic declarations or spectacular displays. Often, he works quietly through overlooked names, ordinary families, and unnoticed acts of service. Yet it is precisely in those hidden spaces that he builds what is eternal. What ultimately matters is not who receives praise from people, but who is seen and approved by God. The fact that the sons of Moses did not stand at the center of the biblical story does not indicate failure. Instead, it reveals a deeper truth. Steady, unseen faithfulness also advances God's kingdom. In his eyes, true greatness is not always found under bright lights. Many times it develops quietly, and its light shines forever before his throne. The story of Gersham and Eleazar gently reminds us of something that may initially feel uncomfortable. Not every prominent servant of God had children who followed the same visible and public path of leadership. Not every significant person in Scripture came from a well-known or influential family. And many times, God chooses to lift up those who live quietly in the background, overlooked by people, yet fully known by him. The sons of Moses, the very sons of the man who spoke with God face to face, did not rise as national leaders in Israel. Their voices were not heard in crowded public places. Their deeds were not recorded in lengthy narratives. Still, the silence that surrounds their lives carries a strong message. It reminds us that God's purposes are not built on popularity, family heritage, or human He selects, prepares, and sends individuals according to his own will, in his own timing, and in his own way. This truth is not only deep, it is freeing. It teaches us that our relationship with God is not determined by our history or by the family name we bear, but by the genuine surrender of our hearts. Perhaps you sometimes feel like you are standing on the outside, uncertain about where you belong within God's plan. Maybe you assume that because your name is not widely recognized or your role is not visible, your life carries little importance in His kingdom. Yet the story of Gersham and Eleazar quietly but powerfully demonstrates that names forgotten by people are never forgotten by God. You do not need public attention. You do not require applause. You do not even have to be noticed. What matters to God is faithfulness, a heart that serves Him quietly with the same dedication as someone speaking before a crowd. A lasting legacy is not created through public achievement, but through steady loyalty. It is in private moments, far from recognition, that some of the strongest expressions of trust are formed. And God sees each one. He values each one. This is the truth that reshapes everything. You can take part in something eternal even if no one else observes it, as long as God remains at the center of your life. If these words have touched you, if they have helped you recognize the beauty of humble service and quiet devotion, do not keep that encouragement to yourself. Consider sharing this message with someone who may need to hear it, and help spread this gentle but powerful hope. A hope that has the power to change lives. May God bless you, and until next time. And until